Wonderful. Welcome everybody to the August 26th Marin County Bicycle Coalition trainer talk and local teams meeting. Really happy to have everyone here. I'm Warren Wells. I'm the policy and planning director for the Marin County Bicycle Coalition. I lead all of our advocacy with respect to paved surfaces. I have a colleague who does all of our Krista Hoff, who does all of our work on off-road. But if it's a paved surface, I'm a person. Happy everyone here tonight. We have a really great guest. So just the format, as some of you may know, for these monthly meetings, we have I start off with a little MCBC bulletin. We have a speaker talk about a topic of interest to bicyclists or local government. Sometimes it's So we have a great speaker tonight. Talk about the history of the Fairfax Bolinas Road. I'll introduce him a little bit later. And then after that, we break out into kind of area-based breakout rooms. And recently we've had the most people for Novato and San Rafael, our local teams there. So, and if anyone is not from those places, feel free to stay in the room with me for a little bit, and we can chat and figure out if you want to where we can go from there. For our MCBC bulletin, I just want to run through some news from around Marin real quick before we go to our speaker. So kind of the things that are taking up a lot of time on our plate. Just a quick update on the Richmond to San Rafael Bridge. As some of you, actually there should have just been a blog post that went up recently. If you didn't have a chance to read that, the multi-use path is still open, but there will be a meeting potentially on October 3rd, or as early as October 3rd, maybe later than that, of the Bay Conservation Development Commission, which will decide if that pathway goes to kind of weekends and Fridays only. If you want more information, check out the MCBC website. Some of you may have been following there's some work happening on Bridgeway in Sausalito, or there should be. There's kind of still no update on that. That's going more slowly than we would like, but it's a project that we're helping push along to get bike lanes on Bridgeway just south of the ferry landing there. A couple exciting pieces of news, kind of in the early. There's going to be a planning process for improvements on Magnolia Avenue in Larkspur that's just kicking off soon. So keep your eye out for that. We don't have any information, but looking at how better to configure Magnolia kind of from south of the Bon Air Bridge, where there's currently a gap in the bike lanes. There's some really exciting grant applications that cities are working on, thanks to advocacy from me and some of our partner agencies like Matt Hartzell, partners at other groups like Matt Hartzell, as well as some of our volunteers. Larkspur is looking at closing the gap along Redwood Highway past the Bevmo and Trader Joe's. They'll be just north of the Warnham pathway. Very exciting, very important gap. San Rafael has applied for money to close the gap on 4th Street between Grand and the Transit Center. So kind of linking the canal, the east side of 101 and the Transit Center. The county has put in an application for trying to improve North San Pedro Road, where it goes under US 101, just near the Civic Center. And SMART is working on a few of their segments. So exciting stuff there. And we're very eager to see the Vista Point Trail, which is a planned trail to connect the east side of the Golden Gate Bridge, the Vista Point, down to Conselman. That is supposed to break ground in about a month or two. And lastly, thanks to MCBC's and some of our volunteers' advocacy, the Marin County Department of Public Works has a new staffer who is a devoted staffer to bike pedestrian planning. Corresponded with her, talked to her on the phone, and she and I are getting together to do a bicycle ride around Marin County to kind of show her some of the good, the bad, and the ugly. So happy to see that moving forward. Okay, so that's kind of a quick recap of what's going on, some exciting progress. And I am really eager to introduce our speaker tonight, who is Brian Crawford. Brian is an author, historian, open space activist living in Marin. Originally from Ohio, he dropped out of college for the summer of love, eventually getting work on a schooner and meeting his future wife, Linda, in Tonga in the South Pacific. I would need to look up where that is exactly. In 1970, I have 78. Is it 78 or 74? Sorry, I was kind of running through this. In 74, great. He and Linda got married. They returned to the States and he became a programmer and now enjoys sailing, hiking, kayaking, geocaching, genealogy, historical research, and early music. You need some hobbies, Brian. He's a busy volunteer on a number of public committees, as well as working as a researcher and archivist at the Maps Annex at the California Room of the Marin County Free Library, and is going to be giving a talk tonight about sort of summarized from his book, The Fairfax Bolinas Road, which is a history of that road. It's a great read. I read it for the first time this spring. I hope you like tonight's presentation, and I think it's still worth picking up a copy yourself. So, and without further ado, Brian, I'll turn it over to you. I'm really excited to see your presentation. Take it away, Ryan. That was great.
Brian's muted.
Yeah, I just asked him to unmute.
Okay, got me now?
Yep, sounds good.
All right. So this is, as Warren said, kind of an abbreviated version of the talk I've been giving for a number of years now. I kind of stumbled onto this bit of knowledge and this line of inquiry accidentally. My wife and I moved to San Anselmo in 1986. And of course, I immediately wanted to explore the area. So got out a map, and my attention was immediately drawn to this incredibly wiggly road here with lots of curves in it. And I thought, that's a road I've got to go explore. I got to check that one out. So I did, and absolutely fell in love with that road. I mean, what's not to love? All those curves and hills, the lakes, incredible views. It really is a special place. There was a major drought that year, and all the lakes were very low. So one day I hiked down to Alpine Lake and walked along the dry lake bed. In a remote arm of the lake, I came upon the foundations of several buildings well below the normal level of the lake. It's a very remote area with no houses for miles in any direction. Curious, I contacted the water district and was told that it was the ruins of the Liberty Ranch, which had been a popular resort on the old Stagecoach Road. That further piqued my interest, and I started researching in the old newspaper archives. I found that the old road had originally gone not to Fairfax at all, but through Ross to San Rafael. I started turning up accounts about stagecoach teams running away, coaches falling off cliffs, bridges collapsing, murderous deer, landslides, forest fires, even an old-fashioned stagecoach holdup. I learned that the area, so secluded and uninhabited now, had once been one of the main thoroughfares across Marin, familiar to generations of residents. There were once ranches and cabins and resorts in the area. I started volunteering at the county library's California Room Map Annex, cataloging tens of thousands of maps of Marin County, turning up lots more material. As I collected all these various stories, I decided to stitch them together using the road as the common thread. So this book is the result. So why build such a difficult road to a tiny little place like Bolinas at all? Well, it turns out Bolinas was once much larger and more important than it is today. Not implying that Bolinas is not important today. In the 1850s, two-thirds of all Marin's residents lived in Bolinas Township. The town had several hotels along the waterfront, stables, blacksmith shops, a tavern, and a shipyard where more than a score of schooners were built. It was once proposed as the county seat. The lagoon was deeper then, and there were extensive logging, mining, and dairy operations which shipped their products on coastal schooners to San Francisco. But these trips were not without risk. Over a dozen vessels ran aground on Duxbury Reef and many more on the fog-shrouded coast of southern Marin. Residents wanted a safe and reliable land route to the markets and railroads at San Rafael. So let's look at what was available in 1875. In 1865, a road was built from San Rafael to Olima, now Sir Francis Drake Boulevard. Other roads connected San Rafael to Sausalito and to San Quentin. In 1868, a road was built from Olima to Bolinas. All these roads soon had stagecoach lines on them, but to drive from Bolinas to San Rafael was a grueling 10-hour drive each way. In the 1870s, a road was blasted into the cliffs from Sausalito to Stinson Beach, now the Shoreline Highway. But Bolinas Lagoon ran right up against the cliffs, and passengers had to get off the stage at McKinnon's Landing. That's about where Audubon Canyon is now. And out on the end of the dock, there was a bugle hanging there, and you'd grab that bugle and give it a blast, and a guy would row a boat over from Bolinas to come pick up the passengers. Also in 1870, the first railroad was built in Marin from San Rafael to the ferry docks at San Quentin. In 1875, the North Pacific Coast Railroad was built from Sausalito to Tamales, but there was still no good way for people to get to Bolinas, nor for Bolinas to get its products out. In 1877, the people of Bolinas petitioned the county supervisors for a road from Bolinas to the railroad station at Fairfax. The supervisors directed the county surveyor, Hiram Austin, to select a route. Hiram Austin is little known today, but he left a huge mark on Marin. In addition to the Bolinas-Fairfax Road, he is responsible for Sir Francis Drake Boulevard, Lucas Valley Road, the Coast Highway, and the Eldridge Grade, the first road up Mount Tam. He was born in Ohio in 1820 and arrived in Marin in December 1861. He farmed in Bolinas for a few years. In 1864, he was elected county surveyor and soon moved to San Rafael. He served 5 terms as surveyor. And in 1873, he created the first accurate map of the entire county. And there it is. In spite of his prominence, I could find no photographs of him and very little about the man in the newspapers or county records. Perhaps the most remarkable thing we know about him is his obituary in the Marin County Tocsin on April 29, 1893. It praises his accomplishments, saying, "It is safe to say that he made acquaintance in a professional way with every acre in the county." But oddly, it then concludes, he had contracted the lavish habits that characterized young California, and when he had money in his pocket, his greatest concern seemed to be to find the easiest and most expeditious way of getting rid of it. His utter recklessness in business matters and some other shortcomings often exasperated those who had dealings with him, and by many he was harshly judged. Even in the solemn presence of death, and writing with the charity that should be extended to the acts of those who can never reply to human criticism, it cannot be pretended that his life was all that it should have been. So I hope I get a better obituary than that one. The obituary also said that everyone knew his real name was Erasmus Spellman. His widow wrote the next day saying it was all nonsense. But whatever his fault or his name, Hiram Austin was a professional and knew his work. The supervisors had not yet decided whether the road should terminate in Fairfax or San Rafael, so he surveyed both routes. The next slides show the route he developed, marked on his own 1873 county map.
Okay.
He did the preliminary survey in May 1878, starting from San Rafael. Austin started at the end of Greenwood Avenue, where the San Rafael Brewery made lager from 1871 to 1918. The road circled around the brewery and started up a steep hillside. I believe that's it behind this fence up here. The brewery grade is little changed today, and as one of the few parts of the old road, it is pretty much just the way it was in those days. It was recently donated to San Rafael by the generosity of Tamara Peters and William Carney, who erected this nice plaque here about the Stagecoach Road. The road then ran down the Macon Grade and Laurel Grove to the town of Ross. From Ross, Austin followed an old logging track where Isaac Shaver used to haul logs down from his sawmill at Alpine to his docks at Ross Landing, now the College of Marin, where they were loaded on schooners for the city. The track, now called the Lagunitas Road, went past these 2 buildings right here. The one was known as the Pink Saloon, run by Joseph Escalier, and the other was a brothel, run by his partner, Mrs. Smith. This provided one-stop shopping for the loggers working in Bill Williams Gulch. The buildings were later joined together and today form the clubhouse of the Lagunitas Country Club. Austin's crew then headed up into the backcountry. Isaac Shaver's logging track went under the future Phoenix Lake to Fish Junction, where it climbed the steep canyon on the South Fork of Phoenix Creek. They passed Janet Porteous's Hippolyte Ranch. The old foundations can still be found in Hidden Meadow. Austin decided Shaver Grade was too steep for coaches and went up the northern fork of Phoenix Creek to Five Corners. This new route became the current Shaver Grade. The old Shaver Grade still exists, but is nearly overgrown and is unmarked. The road then descended into the Lagunitas watershed, past the Bontempi Dairy, operated by two Italian-Swiss brothers, Pasquale and Joseph Bontempi. This ranch had been bought by the Marin Water Company and is now under the north end of Bontempi Dam. So in this picture here, the ranch buildings are directly under the dam. This is the road up to Sky Ranch. And Shaver Grade is on the far side of the ridge dropping down here. So the Bontempi Lake would now be here. The route then followed the valley of the Lagunitas Creek, which was then a wide meadow with big trees along the creek, downstream to Liberty Ranch. Liberty Ranch was a dairy operated by Vincent and Mary Jane Liberty. There were a number of cabins along Lagunitas Creek, many of them hunting cabins or summer homes. This is the cabin for the family of Congressman William Kent. Note the deer hanging in the tree. The route then continued down Lagunitas Creek to the junction of Cataract Creek, the area now called Alpine. Isaac Shaver and Jonathan Mitchner had built a sawmill here, but it had already closed down in 1873. Austin's survey crew now had to cut a trail up the sharp, heavily forested slope of Bolinas Ridge, which climbed 1,000 feet in less than half a mile. They went up Cataract Creek, then cut across it to the west and started hacking their way up the hill. They laid out a twisting route that would allow a wagon to climb the hill. At the top, they could see their goal of Bolinas only 3 miles away, but it was 1,500 feet below them. They had to cross the heads of 3 canyons before they found a practical route down the hogback north of Peck County Gulch. Descending this ridge, they struck the Olima-Bolinas Road. They had surveyed more than 16 miles of road, and it had taken them a week. On June 4th, Austin presented his survey to the Board of Supervisors, and they approved his route to San Rafael. He was sent out again in August with a larger crew to do a detailed survey, staking out the route and providing specifications for 48 culverts and 29 bridges. And he produced a remarkably detailed map, almost 7 feet long. This is a very small detail of it at the, this is Alpine here. In February 1878, Assemblyman Charles Allen introduced a bill to assess a tax of 5 cents per $100 of assessed value on all Marin property owners to fund the road. In the spring, the bill passed, and the supervisors solicited bids to build the road. The county supervisors made the road from San Rafael to Ross a separate project, and the contract was let to Robert Macon. The supervisors advertised for bids for the rest of the road, which they divided into 5 sections. They received 4 bids, with the low bid coming from a company called Lemon and Wing, experienced contractors from San Diego who had built railroads and levees in Northern California. But they were Chinese, and there was very strong anti-Chinese sentiment throughout California at this time. This card for the Working Man's Party of California, I found tucked into a book in the maps collection while I was doing the research for this. It's a very ugly sign of just how racist much of America was in those days, especially against Asians. The Working Man's Party was powerful and had just won a majority in the California legislature and even modified the state constitution. Many of their chapters included armed militia, including one in San Rafael and another in Sausalito. The Board of Supervisors felt that they could not let the contract to a Chinese firm, so they rejected all 4 bids without comment. There must have been a backroom deal, because the following day, the next lowest bidders, a local white firm, lowered their bid to below Lemon and Wings, and they got the contract, sections 2 through 5. Section 1 was left for later. So the job was let to the firm of Colwell and Wilkins. Jesse Colwell was also born in Ohio in 1833 and came to California as a teenager for the gold rush. He took up ranching near Bolinas. In 1864, he married Mary Jane Ingram, the daughter of a Bolinas neighbor. In the 1870s, the Colwells moved to San Rafael, and Jesse worked as a guard at San Quentin. With James Hepburn Wilkins, a young neighbor from Bolinas, he started doing road construction. They built Sir Francis Drake Boulevard over the divide at White's Hill. Colwell and Wilkins estimated that they would need 15 specialist supervisors and about 250 laborers. After lowering their bid so drastically to get the job, they found they could pay their laborers no more than $1.25 a day, very low wages even for that period. No white men would work at those wages, so Colwell and Wilkins hired 250 Chinese, probably lemon and wings men. The road would be built by the Chinese after all. Colwell and Wilkins set up camp at the Bolinas end of the route, and on Wednesday, July 17, 1878, they started cutting and blasting their way up Bolinas Ridge. By early August, they had reached the top and moved their camp up to Bolinas Ridge. But many residents were unhappy at the use of Chinese laborers. An old Chinese man walked down to Bolinas to buy groceries and was set upon by 4 men on horseback who rode him down, beat him up, and left him for dead. There were a number of meetings around the county they called indignation meetings. On August 11th, a mass meeting was called at Courthouse Square in San Rafael. Gangs of armed men arrived by ferry from San Francisco. 40 more rode up from Sausalito with a wagon load of 75 Sharps rifles and plenty of ammunition hidden under a bed of straw. It was driven to San Anselmo to hide it from the sheriff. A number of prominent San Rafael business leaders spoke at the meeting in favor of marching up to Bolinas Hill to persuade the Chinamen to leave their work. After a number of fiery speeches advocating violence, Sheriff James Tunstead deputized 150 armed men who surrounded the meeting. The sheriff mounted the platform and declared the meeting an illegal assembly, and the working men broke up and returned home. So the Battle of Bolinas Ridge was averted, and the road construction continued. They worked their way down into Cataract Canyon, built a bridge across it, and drove the road down the north bank to Alpine. At the end of October, sections 5 through 2 were complete, although not all the bridges had been finished. The first man to drive a vehicle over the new road was a San Rafael physician, as reported in the Marin Journal for December 5th, 1878. Dr. Tolliver has driven over the Bolinas Road the first buggy to roll over it, but he couldn't have done it if the workmen had not carried his buggy over the bridgeless chasms, sometimes swinging it across with ropes. Colwell and Wilkins went back and finished the bridges the day before Christmas, and on the same day, Robert Macon announced the Macon grade from Ross to San Rafael was complete. On Christmas Day, the first man to drive the whole road was the president of the county supervisors, John Charles Gibson. J.C. Gibson drove over the new Bolinas Road, 1 horse, with 2 in buggy in 3 hours, and drove very slowly. So I think their point of saying he was driving very slowly was that he could still beat the normal time by many hours and come in 3 hours. But as it was the first buggy to pass over the new bridges, I can hardly blame him for driving slowly. Now only Section 1 remained. In February 1879, the Board of Supervisors called for bids. This time, the bidding specifically said they would allow no Chinese or Mongolian labor. Colwell's partner, Jim Wilkins, left the firm to start his own newspaper, the Marin Tocsin. He later published that odd obituary of Hiram Austin. Colwell again won the bid. They started construction at Ross in May and reached Alpine 6 weeks later on June 26, 1879. The new road was 16 miles long, 16 feet wide, and contained hundreds of curves. Where springs lay near the road, water troughs were built for the horses. 2 of these still exist and are after nearly a century and a half are still full of water. Even before the finishing touches were applied, a stagecoach line was established by William Gibson to make use of the new road. Here's a stage picking up passengers in front of the Central Hotel on 4th Street in San Rafael. The coaches didn't look like movie stagecoaches. They were open wagons with 3 bench seats and a canvas top. A boot in the back carried luggage, guns, and fishing rods. If you were a friend of the driver or a pretty girl, you could ride up on the seat with him. The road was unpaved. In winter, it was muddy and became deeply rutted. In the summer, the dried ruts could grab wheels and it could be hot and dusty. The drivers were greatly admired. As Jack Mason said in his book, Last Stage for Bolinas, a good stagecoach driver was envied by men and admired by women. He sat up there on the high seat with a cigarette dangling from a lip, the ribbons and a rawhide whip held casually in special calfskin driving gloves. One driver, Frank Page, later became a congressman and stated that the carefulness and skill required as a driver served him well in his political career. Quick runs were expected, and the drivers had to judge the curves and road conditions carefully. The steel tires would skitter to the very edge on the many sharp hairpin turns. It was not a ride for the faint of heart. In the summer, when tourists were flocking to Bolinas, Gibson would sometimes run 3 stages a day. In the autumn, during deer season, hunters would often ask to be dropped off in a likely spot. On the return trip, they'd be picked up and their prey loaded into the boot. On one occasion, a lady passenger shared her seat with the body of a 221-pound bear she had shot herself while picking blackberries for a picnic. I think picnickers were a lot tougher in those days. The stage line became a fixture of Marin for the next 37 years, though it changed hands often. In 1884, Austin's proposed extension to Fairfax was built. It branched off near the Bontempi Ranch, went up the current Bontempi Road and Sky Oaks Road, then dropped down the steep hogback above San Anselmo Canyon to the railroad station in Fairfax. This became known as the Fairfax Grade. That same year, John Oscar Eldridge raised money and constructed a wagon road to the summit of Mount Tamalpais, branching off from the stagecoach road at Fish Gulch. So here's the completed road as it stood in 1884. The stage line ran right past the gate of Liberty Ranch, where Vincent and Mary Jane Liberty ran their dairy and raised their children. Vincent was born in Canada to French immigrant parents and came to Marin during the gold rush. He married Mary Jane Hancorn in 1866, and in 1876, they leased from the Shafter Howard family the dairy started by Loomis Curtis. They raised cattle in the area around Little Carson Falls and lowered the milk to their dairy on wooden sleds on what is still called the Old Sled Trail. When the stagecoach line was established in 1879, their place was just about at the halfway point between San Rafael and Bolinas, and it made a handy lunch stop. They started serving lunches to the stage passengers. Mary Jane's cooking and the beautiful site of their ranch soon became famous. The Libertys decided to turn the ranch into a resort. Vincent built a number of cabins, which they rented out by the day, week, or month to hunters, fishermen, and hikers. It became a very popular destination and operated for 31 years until 1910, when Alpine Dam was built and the entire Lagunitas Valley was flooded. The buildings were torn down at that time. If you'll remember, these were the foundations I saw in 1986. Seeing the success of Liberty's, Christian Frederick Larson decided to open another inn on the stagecoach line. In 1887, he bought 20 acres at a point where the road crossed Bolinas Ridge. He built an inn and restaurant on the north side of the road and called it Larson's Summit House. It was very successful. In 1890, a major fire started in Dogtown and burned up the ridge to Summit House, but employees and guests managed to save the building. Descending toward Bolinas with a full load of passengers, stage driver Leonard Knott found his path blocked by a roaring wall of flame. He couldn't turn around or back up, so he chained his back wheels to keep them from turning, turned off the road, and skidded the coach down the steep slope to Bolinas. Next time you drive that road, take a look over the edge and think about that. In 1897, Larson sold Summit House to Major Henry Cobb, who made a wise decision. For his partner and chef, he hired Constantine DeSella. Born in Greece in 1823, DeSella came to Sausalito in 1850. He worked as a chef on the ferries to San Francisco and developed a reputation for his fine food. He was highly educated and could quote long passages from Lord Byron from memory. His cooking made the Summit House a popular destination. They had one of the earliest telephones in the county, and guests could call ahead for reservations, then ride out on a stagecoach for dinner and spend the night at the inn. DeSella bought the place from Cobb a year later. In 1890, stage owner Albert Sayers decided to change his route to go through Fairfax to avoid the frequent landslides on Shaver Grade. The road from Liberty's to Ross ceased to be used for vehicles. From then on, the road has been called the Bolinas-Fairfax Road. In 1904, another major fire burned from Bolinas nearly to Fairfax. DeSella packed his valuables and fled to Liberty's ranch, leaving one man behind to fight the fire, presumably the least popular employee. That evening, the man appeared, singed and covered in soot, reporting that the resort had burnt to ashes. Although the stage line had a good safety record, there were a number of accidents and runaways over the years. In June 1892, as driver Thad Lewis was starting down the Fairfax grade just north of the Sky Oaks Ranger Station, he pulled over to let a painter's wagon come up. The painter was dragging a ladder behind his wagon, and it frightened one of the stage horses, who leaped off the road, pulling the other horses in the stage with him. Lewis and 2 women on the driver's seat jumped clear, as did a male passenger, but 3 women and 3 children inside did not have time. The stage somersaulted over the horses and plunged 200 feet down the cliff. When the dust had settled, Lewis and the male passenger clambered down to the wreckage. One little girl had a horse fall right on top of her, but she had landed in a small depression and was not hurt. Miraculously, neither the passengers nor the horses suffered any injury. There were other accidents on the road, overturns, runaways, and an attack by a murderous stag. But the most famous incident on the stage line was a holdup. On the morning of Monday, September 19th, 1898, owner-driver Wallace Sayers pulled the stage up in front of the Flagstaff Inn and picked up 6 passengers, then set off for San Rafael. They climbed Bolinas Ridge and stopped at DeSella Summit House. There were no passengers there, but Sayers picked up the mail. On the way down the ridge, they stopped at Mailbox Curve to pick up the mail from the Longley Ranch on Ridgecrest, which was tucked inside a redwood tree that still stands. They arrived at Liberty's at 9 a.m., and Sayers stopped to let the passengers get out and stretch their legs and pick up some snacks. He called his passengers to board the stage, and they started again. Less than a mile beyond Liberty's, near where the Bontempi parking lot is today, they came to a small wooden bridge called Cattle Bridge. Suddenly, a man stood up from under a live oak tree and stepped into the road before them. He had a bandana tied over his face. He raised a revolver and pointed it at Sayers' head. "Put your hands up," he shouted. Sayers managed to stop the coach, but had trouble controlling the frightened team. The man grasped the lead horse's bridle. "I'll hold him. Everybody out of the coach, and keep your hands where I can see them." He ordered Sayers to search the men, adding, "Ladies, you won't be harmed." He got 2 gold watches and a few bills and coins, plus Sayers' receipts for the tickets, a haul worth about $570 in today's money. He ordered everyone back onto the stage, then called, "Drive on, and if anyone even turns his head to look back, I'll blow it off." Sayers whipped up the team and headed up the hill toward Fairfax. When they dared to look back, they saw the robber heading toward Ross on foot. When they reached San Rafael, they notified Sheriff Henry Harrison and described the robber. One of the passengers, a young woman named Annie Gordon, said that she thought she had recognized the robber's voice as that of a classmate from high school, Victor Colwell, son of the man who built the road. The sheriff quickly raised a posse of 6 men. They got their weapons, mounted up, and hurried to San Anselmo, then turned down the road to Ross Landing, where they suspected the robber might be heading. Just past the train station in Ross, they encountered Victor Colwell walking along the road. They stopped him and searched his pockets. He carried a .38 caliber Smith & Wesson and a red bandana containing 2 gold watches and a bunch of cash. They brought him back to San Rafael and put him in a cell in the basement of the courthouse. He was sentenced to 7 years in San Quentin. He was released after 3.5 years and returned to a normal life. He later served as the musical director of a production of America's first musical, ironically called The Black Crook. Those early years of the century were extremely dry, putting a severe strain on the water supply. Water outages were frequent, and people complained about both the service and the prices from the private Marin water company. A new dam on the Lagunitas was clearly needed. The new reservoir would submerge the road. In 1910, the water company started construction of a road bypass over Azalea Hill. This old grade is now being turned into the Liberty Gulch multi-use trail. Finally, in May 1911, the Marin Municipal Water District was created, and it purchased the lands and assets of 2 private water companies. They were then able to acquire land farther downstream and proposed a much taller but narrower dam at Alpine, where the valley narrowed to its steep gorge. Construction of Alpine Dam began in the fall of 1916, as World War I raged in Europe. the Bolinas-Fairfax Road was moved high up on the hill, and Liberties and all the other structures in the valley were raised. The first automobile in Marin appeared on November 10th, 1900. The very first drive they took? Why, the Bolinas-Fairfax Road, of course. Clearly, it was time for the stagecoaches to modernize. In 1913, the owners were Ernest Langford and Bud Crane. They started the first garage in Marin, the automobile livery, now the site of Whole Foods on 4th Street. They also sold Dodges and Packards and hoped they would use the stagecoach line to promote their automobiles. But they soon found their cars had trouble climbing Bolinas Ridge with a full load of passengers, so they bought vehicles that could. The Stanley Steamer 88 Mountain Wagon was a handsome car that at 12 horsepower was powerful enough to climb any hill. In 1906, one of these set the mile land speed record of 127 miles an hour. Here's the steamer arriving in Bolinas. Business boomed as everyone wanted to ride in the unique new vehicles. But in 1916, Langford decided to move the eastern terminus of the line from San Rafael to Sausalito, and commercial use of the Bolinas-Fairfax Road ceased. During the war, the line was run by Greyhound bus lines, and the service was discontinued in 1946. For the generations that had grown up riding the stagecoaches, it was clear that the end of an era had passed. After 34 years of daily service, the big 4-horse stagecoaches would no longer run on the Bolinas-Fairfax. Many people missed them. In 1974, 91-year-old Mabel Dodge Bullis reminisced about the trip made around 1889 when she was 6 years old. We boarded the stage that carried the mail and passengers from San Rafael to Bolinas every day. The route was up the old Fairfax grade, then a long, slow climb up the Bolinas Ridge until the summit was reached. That was a thrilling moment when the whole world seemed suddenly spread out before us, and the 4 horses began to trot down the hill, swinging us around those sharp curves at fully 12 miles an hour. But that was not the last stagecoach to use the road. Marin developed a thriving film industry, and hundreds of westerns were made here, many of them making use of the unspoiled scenery of the Bolinas-Fairfax Road. There's the same spot today. This is a still from the 1914 blockbuster Salome Jane, made by the California Motion Picture Company of San Rafael. This would have been a familiar scene to any resident of Marin in the late 19th century. So this is just above the Meadow Club. There were only 2 remaining changes in store for the road. In 1941, the dam was raised 30 feet, which required moving a stretch of the road even higher up the hill. But by then, the country was embroiled in World War II, and the military considered Alpine Dam a strategic target. Troops were stationed at the dam, and the Bolinas-Fairfax Road and Ridgecrest Boulevard were closed. It was not until 1948, 3 years after the war ended, that the roads were reopened. Since then, the road has been frequently closed by landslides, but each year it is opened again, and it remains a source of pride and pleasure for the residents of Marin, as well as an attraction for visitors. The last chapter of my book describes how to visit the old road and find the historic places still to be found along it. I hope that my talk has sparked or renewed your interest in the beautiful Bolinas-Fairfax Road. Go drive or ride it again with your new knowledge of its history and importance to the development of Marin. So that's the history of the Bolinas-Fairfax Road. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Brian, thank you so much. That was great. I feel like I still learned something new from it. And actually, I feel like there were some photos in there that weren't in your book yeah, great. That one of Summit House was just really, really crisp and fun and so nice. Got some applause from the crowd. Anyone have any questions for our guest? I'm trying to remember if he came up for me while I was reading the book. Brian, one thing I remember from the book was that if you just talk a little bit about Ridgecrest Boulevard, because Ridgecrest Boulevard started off as a private road, right?
Yes.
And then was later given to, I guess, the county parks. Is that correct?
That's correct. It was built as a private road, as a turnpike, and there were 2 toll booths. One right at the intersection with the Bolinas-Fairfax Road. As you come up from Fairfax there, if you turn onto Ridgecrest, just as you, well, it's only like 100 yards from the intersection there. there was a gate and a cabin built there, and there was somebody collecting tolls. The other end was at Panoramic Highway, from which the name Pantoll came. It was the Panoramic Toll Booth.
Wow, fun. That's a great piece of trivia. I didn't know that. I was always wondering where that title came from.
Yep.
Matt, I see you have your hand up, but maybe you stepped away. Oh, there you are. Matt, do you have a question?
Thank you, Brian. Great talk. I look forward to getting a copy of your book. I have a question. In your research, did you come across any stories of people riding bicycles over this road in the early days?
Oh yes, it was used a lot. There was a lot of off-road bikes back in the day. I mean, even before Eldridge Grade was built, I found an article from some, I think it was called Marin Wheelman was the name of one of the early clubs. And they were saying, we're having a ride today from Mill Valley to the top of Mount Tam. And one guy was challenging the others, and he was riding a non-safety bike, one of those with a 6-foot front wheel and a tiny little back wheel. He rode to the top of Mount Tam before the trails were there, before the roads were there. So, and apparently he beat some of the other bicyclists. I also read a story of a women's biking club. It was one of the few, really active outdoor sports that women got into early on, and they kind of didn't have to battle their way in like they did in almost every other activity. Yeah, I guess it was considered genteel enough that they could do it. But they did a ride up to from San Rafael through Fairfax up to the top of the ridge and to Bolinas. And some of the times they were recording were pretty amazing to me. I certainly couldn't do it. So they were doing this in the 1890s. So you guys are not the first to ride bikes over that mountain.
I feel like there's a whole second book to write about this. This was great. Great question, Matt. Thank you for asking that. Any other questions? Anything else come up for folks?
My book is available, and I have 9 other books on Marin County history. They're available at the Fairfax Variety, at the Sugarfoot bookstore in San Anselmo, and they're all on Amazon too. If you just Google for me, Brian K. Crawford, my website, you can see them there.
Yeah, I just put your website in the chat there, Brian. Yeah, it's a great breathy read. You can finish it in a weekend, but there's a lot in there. And if people have any questions for you, can I give them your email if they have any questions that come up later?
Yes, that's fine.
Great. I'll put that in the chat. Also, it's brian@briancrawford.info. If you have any questions that come up later. Matt, are you raising your hand again? Oh, sorry. Great. Well, wonderful. Brian, thank you so much. I really think this is a great presentation. I hope everyone learned as much as I did. Yeah, I hope it inspires people to pick up your book. It's a really fun read, and it's really great to learn the rich history of this county we all love.
Yep.
Warren, can I ask one question?
Oh yeah, of course, Steve, go ahead.
But Brian, thank you so much. It's a wonderful, wonderful talk. I'm just wondering about all the archival documents that you found. Did you find that at the county, or where are all those stored? Are the libraries around San Rafael, or where?
Most of the documentary research was online. There's this wonderful facility called the California Digital Newspaper Collection, and it's got 8 million pages of California newspapers scanned and digitized. And it's free. It's put up by UC Riverside.
Oh, wow.
So it's just got this vast amount of stuff. Now, of course, it's been scanned and run through an optical character reader. So it's just full of typos and mistakes. The text is pretty awful. But if you can scan, and if there's enough words spelled correctly in the document, you can find the documents. And then it's kind of like Wikipedia. You can just fix the text for future people. So it keeps getting better. I've corrected some 180,000 lines of text on it. So that's where I get most of the stories. I just scan for search terms and track it down. I also volunteer with the Marin County Free Library. They have a wonderful facility, the California Room, that's over in the Civic Center. And a few years ago, they purchased a collection of surveyor's maps, tens of thousands of them. And it obviously wasn't going to fit in the California room. So they rented a space over in Los Gamos there next to the sheriff's office. And it's basically a warehouse full of maps. And that's what I do with my other spare time, is catalog those maps. I've done more than 11,000 of them so far, and nowhere near being done. So Hiram Austin's original hand-drawn maps are there. It shows every stake he put in the ground and every little bridge and culvert. It's really interesting. And it shows the old Indian trails, shows the sites of the cabins. It's a great source of information.
Wow, cool. That's special. I didn't know about that either. Thanks for that question, Steve. Well, great. If people have other questions that come up, I put Brian's email in the chat. So again, thank you again, Brian, for your time. We really appreciate it. And I think I speak for everyone for having really enjoyed the presentation.
All right. Thank you very much.
Wonderful.